George Washington Carver. Today, you are going to hear about another man who, like Johnny Appleseed, became famous because of his love for plants. He, too, lived many years ago, though not quite as long as Johnny Appleseed. His name was George Washington Carver. He became famous throughout the United States as a botanist, which is a scientist who studies plants. George first developed his interest in plants as a young boy. As a child, George used his free time to explore the forests surrounding his home on a farm in Missouri. He spent many hours roaming the woods discovering all sorts of wonderful things. George liked to collect things that caught his eye. George was especially curious about the different kinds of plants he noticed during his explorations. He wanted to study these plants further, but he knew that if he pulled them out of the ground and took them back to the cabin, they would die. So, when George found an interesting plant, he would carefully dig it up and remove it from the place it was growing, roots and all, so he could plant it in a special garden close to the cabin. George moved plant after plant to this special garden, where he looked after each and every plant, watering and caring for them, all to make sure they continued to grow. As an adult, George later wrote, "I literally lived in the woods. I wanted to know every strange stone, flower, insect, bird, or beast. Day after day, I spent time in the woods alone in order to collect my floral beauties and put them in my little garden I had hidden in the brush, not far from the house." Fascinated by the plants in his garden, George spent hours tending, observing, and studying them. In time, he came to learn about the special needs of each plant, how much water each needed, whether it grew best in the full sunlight or with some shade. George also took special interest in caring for plants that were not growing well. He became so skillful at caring for these sick plants that people throughout the neighborhood began to call him the plant doctor. George's passion for plants led him to develop another talent, that of an artist. Of course, his favorite subjects to paint were his beloved plants. Though he did not have a proper canvas or paints, he improvised with whatever he could find. George made his first paints from different plant parts. He mashed bark, roots, and wild berries and used them to paint on old boards or even flat rocks. George continued to paint throughout his entire life. George was truly a remarkable and talented person. He was an excellent student who learned quickly. He went on to study at college, eventually becoming an expert in botany, the study of plants. After he finished college, George became a professor at a famous university in Alabama. There, he spent the rest of his life continuing to study plants and experimenting with ways to make them grow better. He discovered many ways to help farmers improve how they grew plants and crops on their farms. George encouraged farmers to grow crops other than cotton, especially peanuts and sweet potatoes. He also found many ways to use peanuts in all different types of products like dyes, oils, and makeup. He even came up with a number of recipes for foods that used peanuts. George Washington Carver is especially remembered today for these discoveries.